Okay. Right. We'll just give people a few minutes to trickle in, and then we'll go from there. Charlotte, are you back as full-time CEO of the NGC?
I am. I'm phasing back, but yeah, I am.
Excellent. I mean, while we wait for anybody to trickle in, I'll just chat. Do you guys have anything fun planned, or is that going to be spoilers for?
Could be spoilers, yeah.
Oh, okay. In which
Yeah.
case, I won't
But
ask.
I have a lot of catching up to do as well, because obviously I've been out of things for a few months, which I'll say a bit more about later. But yeah, so I'm in a big catch-up phase at the moment.
Yeah, always the way when you're away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you got a lot signed up today?
I'm actually not sure what our sign-ups are today. Oh, some. Okay, I think we've got a couple people just trickling in that I need to accept. Yeah, I'm not really sure what our sign-ups today. Also, now we've started putting stuff on YouTube. We have a lot of people watching after the fact if they couldn't get there at the time, which is quite nice from when we've, some people obviously just can't do lunchtimes, etc., especially not this sort of time of year. It seems to be quite busy.
Yeah, a lot of conferences at the moment.
Yes, so many people in my department. You think everyone's back and it's term time, and then suddenly everyone vanishes, and you're like, oh, that's a memo.
Yeah. How's your research going?
It's getting a little stressful. I'm hoping to
Oh.
hand in the PhD just before Christmas is
Oh
my
wow, that's brilliant.
idea. Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I've got 2 chapters are completely done. I'm doing the third like data chapter right now, but
Yeah. Good.
always
Keep
stressful.
going.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe that we're already at the end of October. I don't know where the time's gone.
I
It's
can't believe
terrifying.
you're getting to the end of your PhD. I remember when you were starting it, so time
Yeah,
flies.
it's all I feel like I've been doing this forever and that I started yesterday. There's absolutely no in between
Does.
whatsoever.
And it gets to the point where you kind of get sick of people asking how it's going because it's just like, oh,
It's
lovely that
horrible
they
when
do,
people
but
are asking how it's going and you're like exactly where I was last time. That's the terrifying bit. When you've
yeah.
got something to say, it's like, oh.
But if you've got some chapters boxed off already, that's really good. So it's kind of a good way to do it.
Yeah, that does. I feel like a very mixed position in some ways. Those 2 chapters are completely done, bit of the intro's done. But then because I've been writing as like papers as I go along, like I know some people that would just only be writing by this point, whereas I'm like still messing around on ARC and doing things because I was doing it like in complete chunks. So I'm like in some ways fantastic and in some ways terrifying. Right. Okay, well, we are at 35 past, so I think we should just begin, and it looks like people are just slowly trickling in over time, but we don't want to make anyone late for follow-up stuff. So, in which case, welcome everybody. Thank you for listening to me just ramble for a bit. But welcome to our Wednesday with Wing this week. Today we've got Charlotte Adams, who is the first CEO of the National Geothermal Centre. I've known Charlotte for, at this point, I think coming up to a decade, because Charlotte actually taught me in my undergraduate degree at Durham University. But before that, Charlotte did her PhD at Newcastle, which is where she first became interested in recovering heat from disused mining infrastructure. And since then, she has gone on to do work in academia in both public and private sectors. She's featured on Country File, The One Show, ITV, Channel 4 News. So very, very prolific in spreading the word about geothermal out around the country. And she's also received several awards from both the Geological Society and the Energy Institute. And today she's going to talk to us about her journey and about pushing forward the geothermal sector in the UK over the last 20 years. Thank you very much, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you very much to Wing for inviting me to join you all today. I have been out of things for a little while, which I'll explain more about in due course, but so thank you for your patience in letting me push this date back and rearrange this talk, but thank you also for coming to listen as well. So this putting this title together and this talk together, and after what Ali's just said, oh blimey, I feel old. It's quite scary when you sit down because it just feels like it's gone by in a flash, but yeah, in reality it's probably getting towards 30 years of doing this, you know, a subject that I love. So I'm going to share you a little bit more on that journey, both challenges and positive things, and hopefully you'll find it interesting, and you might be wanting to talk to us more about what we're doing at the moment as well. So here goes. Thank you. So this is the thing that made me feel old, putting this timeline together. And my interest really started when I was 16 at school, and I did geology. So my school was one of few that offered geology at that time. And we did a trip to the North Pennines to look at the mines there, and it was to learn about minerals. And I came home at the end of the day completely fascinated by all these holes in the ground and all this sparkly stuff that had come out of them, with a bag full of rocks, thinking, yeah, this is really interesting and this could be something that I want to do going forwards. And that led to me then going on to do a degree in environmental geology at the University of St Andrews. And when I did my dissertation project, that area of the North Pennines stuck with me, and I was kind of interested in the water environment. So at St Andrews, we didn't have a lot of teaching in oil and gas, which was unusual because obviously back then oil and gas was still a very big thing in terms of university courses and things. But we didn't really have that. But my interest had always been more about water and the water environment than the oil and gas side of geology. So it fit really well for me to do this degree in environmental geology. And for my dissertation, I thought back to the Nenthead mines up in the North Pennines, thinking, well, what is the impact they've had on those water courses? And that's what my dissertation was in. And through doing that, I was working with the Environment Agency, who were at the time very interested in understanding the contaminants from legacy mining in the water courses all over the UK. And they were kind of forming a hit list of the worst mines at that time. So my timing of my dissertation and the fact that they liked what I'd started to do led to a case-funded NERC PhD project, so the Natural Environment Research Council, funded in part by the Environment Agency, funded my PhD, which was to look at the environmental impacts of mining, with particular emphasis on zinc, because zinc, although for humans it's actually quite a good thing to have in your diet, for aquatic species it's absolutely not. And the impacts of it, because it is very soluble and very transportable in water, was something that they were very interested in me looking at. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because that does link to how I got into geothermal. And following that work, I was very interested in mining at this point. At that point, there'd been a lot of fast closures of coal mines, particularly in the northeast, but also northeast England, but also in northeast Scotland. And there was a lot of fairly quick closures, a lot of redundancy. The process perhaps wasn't managed as well as it could have done in terms of how the workforce was released. And it also wasn't really done in the best way in terms of the environment. So basically, they walked away from the mines, pumps were switched off, mines began to fill with water, and nobody really thought about what would this mean going forwards. So I worked with a team at Newcastle where we looked at seeing how quickly the water was rising in these mines, trying to predict where it would come out and how we could treat it, because part of my undergrad project had been talking about treating mines as well, and my PhD had also been about designing treatment system. So we were focusing on East Durham at that point, and it also focused latterly on other parts of the UK. But there was lots of water, lots of warmth, and that was my link with geothermal, which I'll talk about shortly. Following that, because I was interested in heat, I decided to move into consultancy because I wanted to kind of broaden my experience with actually the kind of application of ground source heat systems. So I got a secondment with a consultancy, and they offered me a job at the end of that secondment period and said, we want you to stay with us. So I also got the opportunity to work on hydrogen, biomass, solar and wind projects as well. So I think that gave me a really good breadth across the energy sector and looking at how different technologies fit together and either work together or not, the pros and cons of each. And it helped me personally to bridge the gap from research to application, because although I'm a scientist, I've always been a very applied scientist, probably because I'm not very good at maths. So actually doing stuff for me was easier than actually sitting down doing some sums. So I've seen some of the stuff that Ali's been doing, and full respect to you because it is mind blowing. So yeah, I've always been a very applied person. And so my experience has extended from academia to both private sector, working in a few different consultancies, and also in the public sector more latterly, as I worked for the Mining Remediation Authority, or Coal Authority as was then. Also in that, I should highlight that I did take 2 years out to have a family, which I know is a choice for some people, and I was lucky to have that choice, that I was able to take that time, to bring up my daughter for those first 2 years full time, and run a farm at the time, which was a bit crazy. But it is, obviously there are pros and cons to taking that time, but for me it was something I definitely wanted to do, and definitely would recommend, not to feel pressured that if you do want to take that time, then if you can, then do. And then as my career progressed, so I went back into Durham University after I'd had my daughter and returned to work, and that led to various leadership roles. The research manager for the Brit Geothermal Partnership, which I'll talk about some of what we found out when we were doing that later. The principal research manager at the Mining Remediation Authority, and then more recently the CEO of the National Geothermal Centre, which, following my kind of previous career path, just felt like a natural fit and the next step for me personally. And over the years, I've done quite a lot of mentoring and supervision of future leaders in energy or sustainability. And I still get involved in mentoring, and I have been mentored myself by people, and I'll talk about that later. I think that is a mutually rewarding thing to be doing. And it's really, it's great now to see some of those people that I worked with when they were studying are now on LinkedIn pursuing their own careers and, making a difference in what they do. And I love the fact that I've had the opportunity to be involved with them throughout the time. So some of my career highlights, I think Ali's read a lot of these out, so I probably don't need to go through them all in great detail, but we had some success working with the House of Lords to engineer a change in the infrastructure bill that was going through at that time, which had geothermal in it, but there was a couple of elements in there that weren't quite as supportive as we could have been. And I got to work with Lord Jenkin, and he brought me and said, what do you think? And I said, well, it'd be great if you could change this bit, just change the wording a bit, then it's a bit more all encompassing and a bit more supportive. And to be fair, he went and did that. So it was really great to have that opportunity to work with him on that. And then the work I'd done got recognised through the Geological Society, which is my professional society, and through the Energy Institute, through their Energy Champions Awards. So I was delighted to receive both of those awards, and really, really honoured to do so. In 2024, I really, really had wanted to deliver a mine water heat scheme since I started working with mines, because I could see there was potential there, and I really wanted to make that happen. And so my first job, I think the first meeting I joined when I join the Mining Remediation Authority was get on this call with Gateshead. They're thinking about doing a geothermal scheme. And that was the start of it. So I was involved in the design and drilling and the boreholes and the feasibility work that we did beforehand as well. So involved in kind of the technical work there, and also working very closely with the local authority. I'll talk about that later too. And as we know now, I'm now CEO of National Geothermal Centre. Had the opportunity to do the media work, which I think has been great in terms of obviously getting our message out there, but also for me in terms of when you work with the media, realizing how you need to explain your message so people can understand it. And as a scientist, if you're wanting to get your work out there, I think you have a duty to be able to get your work into a form that someone else can understand if you want to get people to embrace it. And I'd been through with one of the people I was working with on that, explained all about the treatment process at Dordon, explained all about heat pumps, heat transfer, and how it worked. And he said, so it's just like boiling the kettle. And I'm like, no. So we go back, go through it again. Okay, I get it now. It's not like boiling kettle. It's more like your fridge in your house. So those kind of things were very valuable for me to learn, because when you learn about something, you know about it, don't you? But you're working with people who don't, and you want them to know about it, but you perhaps don't understand their understanding of it or a more general understanding of it. So that personally was really valuable for me to have that opportunity to understand what people might want to know. So the early research work, so I've mentioned the Nent Valley. So this beautiful place you can see in the middle was my kind of stomping ground for my research, for my PhD. And this is where it all began, and it involved finding the mine water inputs to the river. So it's a historically abandoned lead zinc mining area. And as well as having inputs of mine water to the river, there's a lot of diffuse inputs as well, where water that's fallen on the ground has drained through the spoil heaps and also gone into the river. So a lot of diffuse metal pollution and a lot of point sources of pollution. The point sources are generally easier to treat because they're in one place and they're a bit more concentrated. So the Environment Agency wanted me to work on a strategy for dealing with those. So we found them all, I ranked them all, I looked at the quality of them, you know, what contaminants were in them. And because of its ecotoxicity to fish, the Environment Agency wanted me to focus on zinc removal, which was a bit unlucky for me because zinc's particularly difficult to get out of mine water. And also they had to be, with them being historically abandoned, they had to be low cost stroke no cost. And, you know, there's often not access to electricity or gas or energy systems that you might want to power a treatment plant, or the space to have it. Or as you can see here, this is a visually beautiful area. It's also a scheduled ancient monument. So you can't just go and put in a warehouse with an active treatment system doing lime dosing and mine water treatment in a building like that. So it's got to be sympathetic to that environment and sympathetic to the fact that there's no revenue streams often to pay for their cleanup. So low cost is essential. And so this project was essentially about addressing environmental challenges. And I think that's something I've always been interested in. I think probably I'm a frustrated engineer because I am no good at maths, but I do like problem solving. So that was really what kept me going through the work I was doing on mining. So removing zinc, as I said, was challenging. At that time, a lot of work was being done in the US and the UK in treating coal mine drainage, which is the picture you can see on the bottom left, which has the late and great Paul Younger, who was my PhD supervisor, staring at ochreous mine drainage, which is effectively iron that's come out of solution, iron that's derived from the pyrite that's often deposited within the coal beds. As soon as it hits the atmosphere, you get bright orange ochre deposited. So there he is looking at how the heck are we going to treat this one? And we did treat it eventually. That involved putting a borehole in to draw it down below that outflow and treating it in a passive system of wetlands that would remove the iron in a more convenient location and then feed it back into the watercourse once it was clean. And that was relatively easy for iron because a lot of you can see there how orange it is, and by aerating it, it kind of clumps together and forms this ochre, which then you can kind of physically get out of the water, which makes it a bit more easier than something like zinc that's soluble. So I had to learn a lot of kind of aquatic geochemistry and how changing some of the water conditions in terms of pH and temperature and things, and the impact that could have on precipitating zinc out as a mineral form. That's effectively what I worked on. And that's now been taken forward and used at the Mining Remediation Authority further downstream here, where they've actually employed a treatment system which is based on some of that early work I did back then. And some of the other challenges are things like the mine water rebound that I've talked about. You know, coal mines were often shut quickly. We didn't know how long they would take to fill. We didn't know where the water would come out, and we didn't know what quality it might be. So a lot of the work I did then was looking at that and solving problems associated with that. We had this raft of treatment technologies that we knew were coming online, but where would we put them and when would we need them? Which ones would you do first? Because there's a timeline involved in building them as well. So I worked very closely with the Coal Authority, as was at the time, on that mine water rebound work. And we also found things like, you know, as soon as the water comes out initially, it's probably going to be a slightly worse quality than it will be longer term. So you might want to design your treatment system around that, what we would call the first flush. You might want to do a different type of treatment initially until it had settled down to its more kind of stable baseline. And that's what you design your treatment system for. The pictures on the top left and right are all from the Nent Valley. So there's one of the adits on the left that's called Capel Clough. It's got a lot of zinc in it, that one. So that's where I did my trial testing. So I did some lab tests of my limestone drain treatment system that I designed. I also did a field test just in front of this adit. And on the right, there's a deep mine shaft, which is connected as part of this system and was interestingly used as a very early form of hydro. So water was dropped down this shaft to produce compressed air, which was then used to power rock drills within the mine. And then below that is a picture of me at Francis Colliery. So part of the treatment strategy was to do test pumping to see how the coal mine would respond to being pumped, and also to get some of the water out, just have a bit of a look at it and what it was like over time, so that we could design a treatment system so that when that was needed, we kind of knew what we would be dealing with and it would give us time to put that in. So my kind of transition to geothermal was thinking about sticking my hands in lots of mine water over the years. I thought these are actually warm, and they're not, you know, some of them are not boiling hot, but they're certainly tepid. So that was a big realization for me. I knew quite a bit about geothermal, the classic high temperature geothermal. As I was working in Durham leading the Brit Geothermal Research Partnership, I was thinking the problem we have with geothermal is we kind of know with pretty much good certainty how hot it's going to get with depth. The problem we have is knowing exactly what's going to be down there at that depth. Can it flow and transmit water, and can we recover energy from that? So I was thinking about, well, why don't we start UK geothermal, given that it's going to be lower temperatures? And at this point, I was thinking more on heat systems and deep systems for producing electricity. But why don't we focus on the easy wins, which to my mind back then, and I still believe this now, are systems that we know flow. So that's thinking about mines, because we know they flow, because the mines, water management within the mines was a big challenge for the miners. And also was, well, we know that they flow because of the rebound and the flow of mine water out of the system afterwards. Also, oil and gas infrastructure, we know that water is produced, and as your oil cut declines over time, your water cut increases. And so there's a lot of information there on temperatures and flow rates of water from both of those man-made systems, and also natural systems. So I was thinking about, well, we've got kind of cave systems and karst systems. So I'm thinking about the geothermal springs and the systems in Bath and other places in the UK where we've got water that's connected with buried cave systems that are at the right depth, that they could be a good target for geothermal. And we had a PhD student at Durham that was working on that. And I know the BGS have done quite a bit of work on that subsequently as well. So those three things I thought were good opportunities because they had that magic permeability potentially. The other things we learned whilst we're doing the Brit Geothermal Partnership, it was a research partnership. There were some boreholes drilled. They were research boreholes. They weren't drilled as production wells. They are still open and available, and people are looking at the uses of some of them going forwards. But some of the things we found were not what we'd expected. So we'd found in the granites drilled in Eastgate, in Weardale, in the North Pennines, that the granites could be highly fractured in certain areas with high flows of water coming out of them, which was great because that's not always what you might associate with the granite and drilling into it. Also, we learnt in the Science Central borehole that was drilled at Newcastle to just under 2 kilometres, we proved the temperature at 72 degrees down there, but unfortunately that borehole didn't float. And that, again, because it was a research well, could be a condition of several things. It could be how it was drilled, or it could be due to the formation. And there have been people looking at this since and thinking of reusing it for a kind of closed loop heat exchange type project because it didn't flow. But the reason it targeted the formation it targeted was because that further north in Northumberland, that formation is a well-known aquifer and a plentiful supply of water. So the thinking was when we hit that same aquifer at Science Central in Newcastle, we would also have a similarly high and plentiful supply of water. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So we've learned that across that fell sandstone formation, there's also lateral variations in permeability, as well as variations in permeability with depth, which you may get because pressures increase, for example. The other thing we learned from a project we were doing was looking at some of the wastewaters produced from oil and gas. And I looked at Witch Farm because it was onshore and there was some potential residential areas in the vicinity that could use it. And I was surprised to find that the potential heat available there was 40 times the heat output already available at Southampton, which at that time was the UK's only large-scale geothermal scheme. So that was a bit of a revelation for us and for other people that we talked to about it. And the other thing we were looking at as well was kind of when we were doing the water sampling, so that links back to my kind of geochemical early history. You can get the composition of the water to tell you kind of what environment it was originally formed in. So that can almost give you clues to where you might find higher temperatures further back in the system. So we call them geothermometers, but there's certain things you can look at which will tell you what's what's been happening. And there's a guy at Newcastle, David Manning, done a lot of work on this with the late Paul Younger, and they both published on that. So if anybody's interested in geothermometers, have a look at Manning and Younger, and they did a lot of work in the Pennines on this as well. So we learned quite a lot through the research partnership, really, which has stuck with us and we've taken and used going forwards. And for me personally, when I kind of finished doing research, I wanted to, because I am applied, I wanted to actually get involved with getting a scheme in the ground. And I could see that the Mining Remediation Authority were moving into mine water heat at that time. And I met with an amazing guy called Jez Crooks, who's sadly no longer with us. But I knew that I wanted to work for him and his team, because he was so proactive in wanting to deliver the mine heat opportunity. So I got the opportunity to be involved with Gateshead, which happened as well because they're a very proactive local authority. They already had done a lot of sustainable energy projects across their borough, including having one of the first kind of CHP heat networks of its kind in their area. And that had been such a success that they wanted to double the size of it. So it was around about a 5-kilometre network of heat network with 2 gas CHP engines. And they said to us, we want to double the size of this network, but we don't want to double our carbon emissions by putting more CHP in there. Could you get the heat from the mines? So that was the question that we had to answer. Fortunately, the mine working situation in that area was favourable, and we got the boreholes in the ground. The project was kind of ready within 3 years from start to finish, and it offers savings in carbon savings. It offers people who are connected to the scheme an equitable greener choice, so they don't have to go out and buy a heat pump. They can get the benefits of a heat pump because there are 2 large heat pumps running as part of the scheme. They can get the benefits of that by being connected to the network, and it means they're not shelling out for the heat pump themselves. And that's particularly important for some of the individual homes and flats that are connected to the scheme. So, for example, there was a lady who had an electric shower prior to connecting to the scheme, and she didn't use it because it was too expensive. But once she switched that to a hot water system, which was connected to the mine water heat network, the cost of her showering came down and she was able to use it again. So it does make an impact and a difference to people's lives. And it also keeps the energy spend within the Gateshead Borough region. So then they're able to use that for other projects. And they're also looking at other geothermal projects and moving forward with other things on their sustainable energy agenda as well. So I was delighted to be involved in this scheme. I'm really pleased to see something that I'd talked about for years come to fruition. And this is what we've got. So they have 2 heat exchangers there that take water from the mine. So there's 2 abstraction boreholes, which were chosen because it gives the council a little bit of flexibility if they want to do work on one of the boreholes. If they want to service pumps or anything, they can still run the scheme off one borehole. So it gives them a bit more flexibility and resilience because the system calls for heat at different times of the year and different times of the day. That builds that resilience in. It goes through the heat exchanger. The water is around about 16 degrees at depth, and the temperature of it is dropped by 5 degrees at the heat exchanger. And then that goes back into a shallower seam through one borehole there. So the water doesn't go through the heat pump. The heat exchanger interfaces with the heat pump. So that's like holding hands with a hot person's hand touching a cold person's hand. So your blood isn't mixing, but the heat is transferring between the two. So in the same way, mine water isn't going into anybody's house. It's going through the heat exchanger back into the ground. The heat pumps then interface with the heat network, and then that supplies a range of buildings throughout the borough. I'll talk about that key learning thing later. But very successful scheme, and because they have a solar farm there during the summer when the heat demand's lower, I understand that this runs in a carbon neutral way because the power for the heat pumps is provided by the solar farm. So really good scheme, which is also being monitored and part of a living lab that the Mining Remediation Authority have put in, because there's another scheme adjacent to this, and so they're looking at interactions and reactions between the 2 schemes, which is supporting our ongoing learning and understanding of these systems. So thinking about the National Geothermal Centre, as I say, I was delighted to have the opportunity to apply for this role when it came up, and delighted to get the job, because it's really a culmination of lots of things I've been working on over the years. And what we want to do with the National Geothermal Centre is to accelerate the UK's geothermal growth and really show its potential, develop its potential for being an important part of our future energy mix. And we hope that this will lead to a much more resilient energy system. For example, we're less reliant on gas imports, particularly LNG imports. We're less reliant on those because we're using more indigenous heat. So we want it to be an affordable and reliable resource, and we believe that it really has the potential to do that. So it has large value in heating, but there is also potential for some electricity generation as well. And what we've done at NGC is we've set some targets that we'd like to see for 2050. We've also got targets for before that time as well, but this is kind of the longer term target that we've set out. So we would like geothermal to supply 10 gigawatts of the UK's heat demand. So that's based on similar countries, particularly Germany, who have similar resources, and how their heat market has grown over the years. So they've seen a 10% year-on-year growth in their geothermal heat sector, and we believe that is possible for the UK as well. For electricity, we would love it to account for 1.5 gigawatts of the UK's anticipated electricity demand, and this was done from various reports that were done for the UK. I believe that target could probably be increased a little because of changes in technology and drilling technology and power generation, power cycle technology. So I think we could hope for a bit more than that. Obviously, these are targets. Any more we can do would be great. This would give us, though, annual reduction of 10 million tonnes of CO2 annually, and it also has the potential to create both direct and indirect jobs, which again is based on growth in other geothermal sectors that have similar geological resources to the UK. So those are the targets we've set. we're working under these kind of priority areas, which from the conversations we've had with people, the conversations tend to fall in these groups. The overarching thing of all of this, of course, is making an attractive proposition for investors to want to invest in geothermal. We've got lots of companies in the UK working on geothermal and actually doing geothermal projects, but unfortunately many of those are not in the UK, and they really see an opportunity. They really want to you know, operate in the UK as well. So that's something we want to work towards. So for example, this is linking to the roadmap that we're producing, and I've worked this as kind of what do we have now, what do we need, and how are we going to get there. So this is just an example of some of the things we're thinking about under these themes. I've got an awful lot more, but they wouldn't all fit onto this page. But for example, on on the infrastructure, we've not got a lot of heat delivered by heat networks now when you compare us to some of our mainland European neighbours. Maybe like Denmark has 60% of heat going through a heat network. The UK, it's only 2%. So the heat network zoning opportunity is good. The target for clean electricity is good because that will help to grow the number of heat networks, hopefully. But I think in order to achieve that, there are things we need, like grid connections for large-scale heat pumps and things, and for deeper geothermal systems if we install those as well. Integration for hybrid systems, and you could do things like the Gateshead scheme, which was obviously a CHP one, but switched to both CHP and geothermal. So there's an opportunity to look at switching some of their existing systems as well as doing some standalone geothermal ones. And, we need business models. Gateshead's, the information about how theirs works, obviously is commercially sensitive, as a lot of these things are. So we need to find ways to be able to share the information on what are the benefits for doing this, so that people can see it as a real and valuable option. So that's kind of an example of how we're looking at just along the infrastructure pathway that I've identified there. But that's kind of what we're doing as part of our roadmap at the moment. So in terms of the NGC and its leadership and the things we're doing at the moment, so our team is there on the right. We also have some secondees from the Net Zero Technology Centre, who are one of our founding partners, along with the Rees Foundation and Durham University through through the Durham University through the Rees Foundation, and also Shift Geothermal, which is a not-for-profit entity established to promote the use of geothermal from oil and gas infrastructure. So that's our team there. The things we're doing, so the North East Combined Authority established a geothermal task force some years back, which was originally for local authorities in that region. It's grown to go beyond local authorities. It's grown to go beyond mine water, which is what it was originally looking at, and it's now a national entity covering all kinds of geothermal. And at the moment we're having kind of update meetings where people are able to share the projects that they're doing and updates that they have on geothermal activities that they're taking forwards. But what we also want to do on that is to bring in some working groups as well, so that the task force will actually tackle some of the challenges or things that people identify they would like to do or need help with to make geothermal happen. So we were going to have some working groups to do that. And we're due to talk to DESNZ actually this afternoon, who are obviously behind the task force, and we will be working with them as well to agree how we can get more out of the great number of people that come along to that group. We're also, as I mentioned, developing a roadmap for geothermal that has been delayed a little this year for reasons I will go into shortly. We've been partnering with people on new geothermal projects as well. So some people, when they start these projects, they don't know where to go for help. They don't want to do a project, take the wrong advice, and for it not to work. So we've had a lot of inquiries where we're basically using our knowledge. I'm using my knowledge to suggest to people the way they might do things. The types of organisation they might use. Obviously, we don't really recommend one body or one person over another. We want to remain impartial and inclusive of everybody. but it would be like, these are the types of organisations, this might be the type of experience you'd be wanting them to demonstrate to you before you would engage them to do your project, just to give them some guidance maybe on procuring a driller, or just guidance on those kind of different parts of the project. So we're and acting as a critical friend in many cases as well. So we've got several projects that are just starting now. Ground hasn't been broken, but we are in close connection with them, helping them to shape those projects up as they get towards drilling. We're also looking to grow our team, so that's something we'll be working on in the next few weeks, and kind of building on our in-house knowledge and experience and reputation between the people that are in the organisation to become a go-to for kind of impartial and knowledgeable advice on geothermal. And we've also put in a spending review, expression of interest, so we're waiting for feedback on that. But our aim would be to operate in a similar way to the Net Zero Technology Centre, who are kind of one of our parent founders. And they operate as a through funder. So their funding they get from government, they pass on to others so we do things like technology calls. We'd love to have some kind of research industry calls. It might be a call on looking at policy and regulation, but if we can become a through funder, we can do a lot more with those things. So over the time of doing the things I've been doing, I'd like to share kind of some of the lessons learned. And I think I'd like to think I've built a good reputation across the field of geothermal. And I think it's important to build that reputation and be professional. And building strong relationships, I think, is key as well. There's people I've worked in with the sector for many, many years now, and many I consider as friends as well, which links to the last point there. There are some really great people out there. A lot of us do this because it's what we love. That's the reason we get up and get out of bed in the morning, is we want to make a difference. We want geothermal to work. People I talk to about it who aren't necessarily involved, but people I might meet personally and say, what do you do? When I tell them, like, well, that's a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing it? And people just maybe don't know enough about it. So I think that kind of building that reputation is key, and those relationships are key. As I've found, I've had to move around a bit to gain experience. So I was in academia, and I wanted to when I left the first time to go into consultancy, I wanted to do that to broaden my skills, and we weren't really doing a lot of geothermal in academia then. It was quite a difficult space to be in. It was a pretty lonely space. And for the second time, I could see the opportunity to get involved in getting a project in the ground. So that's why I moved. And so when I look back through my timeline, I was like, gosh, I have moved every few years, but that I think is not uncommon these days, but you may have to do that to move forwards where you want to. Ask for help where necessary. So there's lots of great people out there who will help you if you're wanting to do a particular course or get involved in a different part of the sector, or you're wanting to hold an event or something. There's lots of people who can give you lots of help, and most people, I think, are very receptive. And I think mentoring can be really helpful. Obviously, it's helpful personally. I've been lucky enough to have some fantastic mentors. Nothing really done formally, maybe just kind of informal mentoring through people I've developed good and strong relationships with. And obviously that's been personally helpful to my career. But now I'm at the age I'm at, and with the experience I have, I'd like to feel I can give back as well. So I have undertaken mentoring and obviously supervising of students when I was at the university and things. And that is also very rewarding personally. I like to feel I've kind of helped people. So if you do have the opportunity to have a mentor or get involved in mentoring, it can be really rewarding. What I found with my work is multiple skills and disciplines are required. We've worked quite a lot with engineers, we worked a lot with social scientists, also worked with other disciplines within earth sciences as well. And I think the fact that I've moved around and worked across the sectors has been really useful. Doing research at Durham, I was working on everything from geothermal to electric vehicles, which was really interesting. And same in consultancy, as well as working on heat pumps and using canals for heat pumps instead of mine water. We're also looking at wind development projects and things like that. So it has helped me get that multidisciplinary approach. Maybe I do see myself sometimes as a bit of a jack of all trades, and hopefully more of a master in one area, but it has been valuable to get that breadth of experience. And I would say that persistence pays off. So when I started talking about using those mines up in the cold North Pennines for heat, and people were like, oh, we've got, back then, obviously it was 20, 25 years ago, we had access to cheap, plentiful gas supplies, and everyone was like, you're crazy, that's never going to work. But it stuck with me, and I thought, no, it does have a valuable role, even if initially it's just for maybe off-grid places that have fewer alternatives. But persistence does pay off. So if you have an idea and you believe in it, I would say definitely stick in there and keep going with it. Challenges we face in terms of geothermal, there's of course there's lots of challenges with everything, but we've got challenges as I experienced back in the day from our cheap and plentiful gas. That situation is changing now, but there's still the thought about business as usual. And we over the time when we've replaced energy systems, we've always replaced hot things with hot things, getting people's heads around not using water at 80 degrees to heat a room to 20 degrees is quite a challenging complex because that's a concept, because that's just how we've always done it. But there's masses to be done there. Regulation, I think we have some very good regulation in this country which does protect particularly things like the water environment, which I've always had a personal interest in. Whether all of it is appropriate for geothermal, and perhaps in some cases I think some of it could be streamlined to allow projects to happen more quickly. I think there is potential there for change. We've always got competition from other energy sources, which doesn't really bother me massively, because I think we haven't really had a clear energy policy in the UK for many years. So I think everything's still on the table and everything's up for grabs. So it's, to me, I just think, you do what you do in your area, you're aware of the other things, but I don't feel particularly threatened by other energy sources. And I think there's potential in many instances to collaborate and connect those energy sources together, or have kind of a hybrid system. Quite often geothermal is excluded from maybe policy statements or government reports that come out. When I get one and it's, when it's kind of geo or energy related, first thing I do is a control F and type in geothermal, and if it doesn't come up, you can, oh, heart sinks. But I think that is changing. I think people are getting more aware of it now, but it's still frustrating. There's a high upfront cost and risk, because obviously with some of these systems you've got to drill them unless you've got the geothermal waters at surface already. That there's debates about whether that's a perceived risk or not. So there's quite a lot of work to be done on the kind of messaging and actually, how much does it cost and how long does it take to get that back, and what are the risks of doing that? And there's still that lack of awareness. So, some people have still not heard of geothermal, or they don't think that it's relevant for the UK. Some people think that initially all of the reports done for the UK on geothermal focused on electricity production, whereas for the UK, with its geology, heat production is the far bigger prize. So those are kind of some of the challenges that affect the geothermal industry at present. You may also come across challenges on your individual projects, and these are thinking of, this is we had technical challenges on the Gateshead project, which were to do with the kind of hydraulic performance of the boreholes we drilled, and the way they were drilled initially with the 2 abstractions and the 1 re-injection meant that when you started to pump the water levels in the abstraction boreholes dropped too much, so that they were becoming out of limits for the pump. And obviously you can put the pump further down the hole, but you're using more electricity to lift that water out. So one of the challenges we had to think about was, how can we make this system flow better, because the lower seam was under a bit more pressure. And what we did was we drilled an interconnecting borehole between the seams, which depressurized that lower seam. So effectively beforehand, if you remember the experiment that they gave you at school, where they gave you a syringe full of water and you had to try and pull the end out of it and you couldn't because they'd sealed the end, that's a little bit like what we were experiencing before we put that other borehole in. When we had that other borehole in, that lower seam was able to give up its water much more easily, meaning that the water levels in the boreholes didn't drop as much, and they were within the limits of the pump, so that the electricity costs of lifting the water from the ground were still reasonable and workable. So that was kind of one of the challenges. And there's other challenges you come across the way, non-technical ones. We had to be compliant with the Environment Agency. We had to be compliant with the Mining Remediation Authority's kind of permits and licensing process as well. So they're all things that can be overcome. They just might need time to understand. And a little bit about explaining my absence this year. So I had lots and lots of plans for this year, and this year has been a bit of a disaster. I ended up in Durham Hospital with an unexpected cancer diagnosis, which I will talk about a bit more widely with people when it's a little bit easier to do so. It's still a bit raw, but I do want to raise awareness of what I've been through, and hopefully that might help few people. But just to say, I ended up having 2 operations. The second one was a major one that has had life-changing consequences, which has left me with an invisible disability. And that's obviously difficult coming back to work and managing that. But it is great to be using my brain again, and I'm really glad to be back. But it has taught me that perhaps you don't always know what people are dealing with, and maybe I'd like to kind of think of Simran just put a heart on there. Don't be nice or I will cry. And Fiona, please. It's very lovely of you. Thank you. But it has taught me that quite often you don't know what I'd like to think I'm a patient person, but sometimes you don't know what people are dealing with. And sometimes you're in the supermarket and you're like, oh, come on, just hurry up. And actually, people might have stuff going on that makes it a bit more difficult for them to do things. And I'm certainly in that position now, but it's not going to stop me doing anything, I hope. I'm back and I'm raring to go and wanting to get back to doing the things I love as soon as possible. And some of you on this call have been very supportive of that as well. I'm really thankful for that. But I would say, I mean, I had very few symptoms. I had 1 symptom, and as I say, I will share details on that in due course. So it was a surprise for me because I didn't have any family history or anything like that of cancer, healthy lifestyle, exercising, not eating meat, didn't drink that much, all those kind of things, no smoking. But I would say, listen to your body. I mean, the 1 symptom I had was my body asking for help. And I would say, any of you, if something doesn't feel right, do get it checked out. Hopefully it won't be, and more often than not, it's not something bad, but do listen to your body when it asks for help. So looking ahead, I'm looking forward to getting the year out of the way because it has been a nightmare, but I'm very much into catching up on everything. So if there's things I'm missing or have missed and I'd love to connect with you again, then do give me a shout to get me up to speed on all the things I've missed out on. We want to focus back on launching our roadmap, which has been moving forward thanks to some of our secondees whilst I have been off, because I've been out in total for about 5 months this year with other bits and bobs in between. So it has been difficult to do a lot of things. Doing a lot of reframing and rethinking geothermal to make it fit into other, to some of the less tangible reasons for doing it, which are equally important, but maybe aren't the ones that spring to mind instantly. So that can help you to weave it into other conversations. So we're doing quite a bit of that. Picking up the stakeholder conversations, because obviously I've missed out on quite a few of those, and running the task force, carrying on with that. And I jumped on the AI bandwagon here and got it to look at what the geothermal nation would look like. And this just shows you really that obviously AI is based on the information it sees out there, and I think there's a lot to be done, isn't there? We're not going to have big tubes of steam everywhere in the UK, and there's not fires underground, but I think it was interesting to just see what that came up with to show you what we still need to do. So thank you very much for listening, and love to deliver a geothermal nation. I'd love to have you on board, so please do get in touch with us if there's anything else we can help with. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. That was a great talk. And yeah, thank you for sharing what you've been going through. And I do think it's a really important message to remember to look after yourself as well as trying to do everything else. So yeah, thanks very much for a great talk.
Thank you.
Right. If anybody has any questions, if you would like to either pop them in the Q&A or we've changed the settings. So if you want to ask your question out loud, you can just turn on your microphone and stick your hand up and we can talk. While you guys consider what you might want to ask, I have many questions. So please, somebody interrupt me with another question or I'll end up monologuing. I mean, I've got so many where to start. I suppose as you in the National Geothermal Centre now have quite a holistic view of geothermal in the UK, if I were to give you a magic wand for the day in the spirit of Halloween and you could just change one thing instantaneously to improve the chances of geothermal moving forward and move faster, etc., what change would that be? And would it be different for different types of geothermal?
I think probably it's a really good question, but I think probably to have some of the support mechanisms that have worked in proven to work in other countries is what we need. And I have talked quite a bit to the industry about what would you rather have, an RHI or a risk insurance scheme? And they're like, well, we'd love both, but realistically, that probably isn't going to happen. So I have been doing quite a bit of work on that. But I think, in other countries where it's worked really well, they've had that kind of heat incentive or feed-in tariff for heat. They've had some kind of risk insurance scheme, and they'd had kind of an open access approach to data and data sharing. Those three things seem to be what's unlocked it elsewhere. So I think that's really what we want UK to have. And we have got access to quite a bit of data, but some of it's a bit all over the place. And you'll have known from your PhD just trying to, find the information. So I think it would be those support schemes would be top of my list.
Great. That seems very sensible to me. Anne-Marie, you have a question.
Hi there, Charlotte. Thanks very much for that very interesting talk, and thank you for your honesty and also your bravery in sharing your journey, your cancer journey, and I wish you all the best. I had a quick question. I'm also passionate about geothermal. I have come out of the oil and gas industry and spent the last 4 years advocating for geothermal with central government. And I was just interested to understand your interactions with the REA, who I think you've signed an MOU with. And they've also more recently joined forces or acquired the GEAA, obviously far too many acronyms for one phone call, for one question. I just wondered how that might all work and how we do work together to continue to raise the profile of geothermal and try to persuade the government to at least signpost their support for geothermal in the UK?
Yeah, that's also a good question. And to be fair, a lot of those agreements, I mean, the MOUs we signed were things I was working on before I was off, and obviously I'm aware that we've signed them, but we haven't actively met since to work out how that's going to manage in reality. Somebody was talking to me about the RIA and GIA, and then they were like, "Are there any other kind of ears?" Like what? Which was entertaining. But yeah, I think we risk things looking messy if there's groups doing this, that, and the other all over the place. So I think perhaps their role and ours too as an overarching body will be to coordinate some of that activity to make sure people can go to the things they want to, because there is so much happening. You don't want, event fatigue and those kind of things setting in, and how to maximize our impact, and who's approaching government, who are the people they're approaching. Are we going to go in for a two-pronged attack, or are we going to spread ourselves out to go for different people in different parts of the organisations that we want to talk to? So I think that's probably what we need to agree and work through with them. But as I say, I haven't actively started that because I've only been back a week. But I think that's how I see it anyway. I think we need clarity on who's doing what, and who we ask as well. Who is our key contact that we go to in government? That needs to be clear as well, because that's not immediately clear to me presently.
I think having a unified voice is going to be really important, but just in giving a clear message to take to, I mean, and I'm specifically talking about government here as a stakeholder, but I think also for the public, and as you rightly say, it's explaining it in messaging and terminology that they understand, and it's not something that they are nervous about because it's not something they can see or feel or touch because it's beneath their feet.
And in some ways that's a good thing, because you can have it and it doesn't really cause you any, you haven't got a potentially poisonous gas producing boiler in your house anymore. There's lots of benefits to it. Yeah, I do think we need a unified voice, but that doesn't have to come from one place. I think there is plenty of mileage in lots of people delivering that message, as long as that message is consistent and the messaging is clear. So I don't think it all has to be. So it's unified in terms of saying the same thing, but not just coming from one source. Because
Yeah.
I think sometimes if lots of people tell you it, you may be more inclined to believe it than if it's just one person that keeps coming to you saying you need to do this, you need to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, not a question from Fiona, but she's put a very nice message in the chat, basically talking about how amazing you are, Charlotte.
Oh,
But
Fiona,
I
man,
will say,
don't.
she said, not only a fantastic boss, but I'll add, as evidently I have ended up doing mine geothermal stuff. You were evidently a fairly good lecturer, as I don't think I'd ever heard of it before you told me about it. So evidently you've done fairly well in several different arenas.
Thank you, Fiona.
Right. Oh, we've got a question from Simran. She says, sorry, she couldn't quite make the front of the or the beginning of the presentation, but she's asking, is public awareness an area where the National Geothermal Centre is engaging?
At the moment, it isn't, because at the moment it's mainly me doing the work, but it's certainly something we'd love to do, and it's something I see as very important. So we are talking about how we can do that, and looking at ways in which we can do that as well. So, you know, getting involved with more public engagement events, I think, would be really important. So we'd love to, and if that's something you're interested in as well, and you've got ideas for it, love to have a chat about that as well at some point, because it's key. It is key, and getting it into schools and early education programs, I think, is key as well. I mean, my daughter's 18 now. She did her GCSEs 2 years ago, and they're still teaching about coal-fired generation, which is like, what's going on here? So there's lots to be done.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlotte, for your talk, and I agree. Like schools, especially, and I'm thinking if the National Geothermal Centre is recognised by schools in the areas as like an organisation that they can come to, that would be such a good thing. And I'm sure you'd have lots of volunteers who'd want to put their time to spend a day in a school with children. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
it's a good
really
idea. Yeah, and we have talked about, you know, because we're a not-for-profit entity, whether we could make more use of volunteers, you know, like the National Trust do or something. I said it to one of our board, and they were like, oh, actually, that's not a bad idea. So yeah, I think there are lots of people who have worked either in industry and looking to retire and maybe want to give back and are interested in geothermal. So I think that voluntary resource could be really important as well. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to use my power and dive in with another question. You talked quite a lot about mentoring. I was wondering if you could tell us how you found a mentor, and then of the people that you have mentored, I know some of them would have been your students while you were an academic, but if there have been others, how either they found you or you found them.
Yeah, I think I found them through, I mean, personally, it was people I worked with that I got on well with, that were then prepared to broaden discussions instead of maybe just what we were working on there and then, to the wider stuff about, well, where do you see this going and what do you want to get out of it? And people that, so for example, John at Durham, who you know well, has been an amazing mentor for me for many years now. And he's very generous with his time. I don't know how he does everything he does with his time, to be honest, but you know, he's been great. I've got another person on Durham. Well, I've got several, but there's another lady on Durham Energy Institute who is also fantastic, giving up, you know, just there for advice. And I think it is building that good relationship with them. You're working together on something common, but you're also prepared to probably talk more widely about the roundabout career type things that might help you. And then at Durham, I found them through different means. You know, I meet people at conferences who might say, you know, can we have a chat about something? And then we'll have a chat about that. It might move on to career stuff, and then it might move on to, well, could I talk to you again? And so then that starts off a kind of mentoring process. Through Durham Energy Institute, the students, so I'm still a co-director of Durham Energy Institute as part of my role at NGC. So we get through that, students sign up if they're interested in mentoring, and they pick a person based on their skill set. So I had a couple assigned to me, I think it was last year. And then it's up to them to get in touch and make that contact. But once you've had a chat, then they can come back to you if they want to. That worked less well, I think, because I think when it happens more naturally, it's a bit, because you've identified commonalities or some bond or something that enables you to talk. So I think that's what's key, that kind of alignment of personalities and interests and goals, I think, to pick a mentor or be a mentor.
Great, thank you very much. Unless anybody has any other questions that I've missed, as we are now just a little bit over time, I'll wrap us up and say thank you very much, Charlotte. That was a really fantastic talk, and really interesting to see the path that you've taken and how much you've managed to do. I think that's really quite impressive. For everyone, our next talk is a slightly different date than usual. It's going to be on the 3rd of December. It's Olivier Zing, and I may be about to completely butcher this, but he's talking about an EGS project called Oatsorn. Not really sure on the pronunciation, but if you come along when he's talking, you can hear it done properly. But yes, thank you very much, Charlotte. Thank you everyone for coming along. And I think that about sums us up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Right. Oh, there we go. Was that a brief hand up I saw as we were leaving? I'm going to presume not, and I'm going to end the event. Very sorry if it was.